let's just hear the Bittensor elevator pitch from you, and let's go from there.
Yeah. So to really kind of give you an overview, Bittensor is a lot like a graph. You really have two different acting entities. You have your validators and you have your miners, right? Now, the validators are not really the blockchain validators that I think a lot of people are used to hearing. They're actually machine learning validators. And what they really do is they validate and ensure that the production, the outputs of the miners are coming from real AI models. Now, the miners on the other side are actually artificial intelligence models being run by people, entities, really anybody who's interested in trying to compete for TAO at that time. Now, the validator's other job is actually also being a front-facing entity to the system, right? So you can't really just ping every single miner on the system and get back an output from the models. You actually have to go to the validators, and the validators themselves actually give you back the best output from the system. So to give you a bit of a grounding example is, if you're using OpenAI, you're speaking to ChatGPT, which is a very smart person. When using Bittensor, you're actually speaking to a room of smart people, and you're getting the best response from the smartest person in the room. And that's sort of the approach that we're taking here. One of the biggest upgrades I think everyone's very excited about is subnets on Bittensor, right? Which really enables you to literally carve out a piece of the network to an idea or project that you have in mind. So that basically enables us to actually deploy models and to enable multimodality and kind of enable us to get away from the monolithic approach of, like, let's say, okay, Bittensor from the founding day up until the subnets release was really just text models and that's it. Now you can have actually, with subnets, you can actually have predictive models. You can have image generation. You can have pre-training. You can have even prime number generation, interestingly enough. So you can really do everything. And Bittensor is sort of becoming this one-stop shop for AI, where really we're trying to abstract away the blockchain side of these complications and just keep it as open as possible, even from a open source perspective and for a developer perspective as well, where people can just basically use the system in a straightforward way as possible. We're trying to really disrupt without interrupting here.
It's pretty cool. So just to make sure I understand the supply side well, so those that have powerful or smart or unique AI models sort of come to Bittensor and they allow, I guess, other people to run these models. And then when users come and they want to use the network for some reason, which we'll get into, they are then pinging like these models, and then the model creator earns an incentive.
In a sense, yeah. So what you're really doing is you're deploying a model in the shape of a miner, and the model just basically is ready for prompts coming in from the other side. Now, what happens is these validators will prompt the models and they'll say, okay, what is the capital of Texas? Or even something more complicated. Let's say, how do covalent bonds form? And the models will basically all respond back. And the one that passes the validator's tests, which is basically a stack of reward models, the one that actually is able to give back the best response, that model is rewarded. And the others are basically rewarded a little bit less for their responses. And effectively, the ranking is achieved in this way. You're really trying to get ranked higher than your peers.
It's interesting. So I guess I don't know enough about OpenAI or Google's Bard or things like that, but my assumption was always that those models that we all kind of know and love is just sort of one big model. And on Bittensor, there are, potentially hundreds or thousands of models. Is that the right way to think about it?
That's right. Yeah, that's the right way to look at it. It could be really any number of models you're talking to, but getting back the best response out of all of those. It's sort of, we're sort of trying to get the purest form of knowledge that you're seeking.
It's pretty cool. It's crazy how history rhymes, right? Like in crypto, we've been debating, this app chain versus modular thesis, the monolithic versus app chain thesis forever. And meanwhile, it seems like it's rhyming here where you have, dozens or hundreds of models versus centralized counterparts that have, call it one main model.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Like, are there that many people providing models to this? Like, I always assumed there was like a couple of gigabrains that had like, a god tier model, but are there that many people that can provide differentiated models for different use cases?
So that's the kind of a hard question to answer because we don't have visibility onto the other side, right? It could be maybe one person that has basically, registered into the network quite a few times and released, say, 10 models, but they're all performing very well. Or it could be 10 people, or it could be any number of users on the other side. What we really truly care about is the outputs of these models, right? So one of the things that the validators do as well is they prevent people from spamming the network. So for example, what's stopping me from deploying, let's say 10 ChatGPT endpoints on the network and trying to basically get back the best response for all the models that I own, right? And that's sort of where the validators come in. That's where they ensure that, okay, the response has to be varied. It has to be of a very specific output that we're looking for. And it should be of a very specific structure that we're also looking for. So basically identical responses get penalized, for example. To basically answer your question more simply, to the extent of how many people are on the network, we don't really have a real number, but we do have a number for the demand, which is basically represented by the amount of people who are recycling TAO to actually get in, which is quite high at this point, depending on the subnet.
That's interesting. So let's run with that. Let's assume that there are, enough people out there to create differentiated models, provide them to the network to be used. What is your worldview on why a multi-model AI project would beat a centralized model that has, let's call it one model, like an OpenAI? And I assume they have one model. I'm not actually sure, but, let's just assume that's the case.
Yeah. So OpenAI actually does have different models that they run, but they're all different flavors of ChatGPT in a sense. What they're really doing is, if your question is simple, it doesn't get sent to the massive model. There's no point. It costs them too much to do. So it's sent it to a simpler one, a smaller one that still has similar capabilities. And so to answer the other question is, why use many when you can really use only one? But the really interesting sense here is that if you used, say, one model over and over, let's say we decide, hey, you know what, let's just hang the towel, let's give it all to ChatGPT and let ChatGPT handle everything. Now, the problem with that is you're sort of losing generalization. You're losing generalization, right? What's happening is ChatGPT is going to answer you in the way that OpenAI has trained it. It's not going to answer you in any different way. So you're really succumbing to the whims of the OpenAI engineers and the OpenAI data scientists who have trained the model in a very certain way. And as humans, we are all prone to bias. And that's just a human condition. That's how we are. We are all wired this way. I'm biased, you're biased, everyone's biased. Now, what you're doing is you're sort of centralizing all of this bias and all of these issues into one place, where it's going to be completely exacerbated. But if you take, for example, a system like Bittensor, right? Many models are existing and many of them have biases. And what happens instead is we are sort of encouraging people to speak to all of these models. You can actually ping the network and get back every single response and pick for yourself, right? You don't have to constrain yourself to one model trained by a very specific entity and be done. So in a perfect world, to be honest with you, is to have the Googles and the Metas and the OpenAIs of the world participating on Bittensor and provide their power, provide their models on top. This is only going to make the entire collective much stronger and give you a more generalized response, and in a sense, sort of reduce the amount of variability in the response as well. So give you more of what you're looking for in an answer that is not controlled by a single entity.
So when I went